My name is Micah, and on today's episode, I'll begin the channel by reading a brief portion of Destiny 2's lore book titled Unveiling. Releasing alongside the Shadowkeep DLC, this is more of a test and a warm up, so please excuse any beginner mistakes I may make, and enjoy. Pleased to meet you. One of your philosophers said, "It is not to be thought that the life of darkness is sunk in misery and lost in sorrow. There is no sorrow. For sorrow is a thing that is swallowed up in death, and death and dying are the very life of the darkness. He was a shoemaker. He was right, and it matters more than anything. According to him, the visible world is a manifestation of eternal light and eternal darkness, and it is in eternal opposition that eternity has revealed itself. The fall was necessary for creation to escape its first imperfect stasis and seek a truer form. Heresy? Well, then, I am the heresiarch." The philosopher died of a bowel disease. Those who do not exist cannot suffer and are of no account to any viable ethics. If the true path to goodness is the elimination of suffering, then only those who must exist can be allowed to exist. It is the nature of life to favor existence over non existence, and to prefer the fertile soil to the poisoned wind, because those who open their mouths to that wind pass from the world and leave no descendant, whether of flesh or of thought. But imagine the abomination of a world where nothing can end, and no choice can be preferred to any other. Imagine the things that would suffer and never die. Imagine the lives that would flourish without context or corrective. Imagine a world without me. Gardener and Winnower. Once upon a time, a gardener and a winnower lived together in a garden. They existed because they had to exist. They had no antecedent and no constituents, and there was no instrument of causality by which they could be portioned into components and assigned to some schematic of their origin. If you followed the umbilical of history in search of some ultimate atavastic embryo that became them, you would end your journey marooned here in this garden. In the morning, the gardener pushed seeds down into the wet loam of the garden to see what they would become. In the evening, the winnower reaped the day's crop and separated what would flourish from what had failed. The day was longer than all of time, and the night was swifter than a glint of light on a falling sugar crystal. Insects buzzed between the flowers, and worms slithered between the roots, feeding on what was and what might be. The first grating in existence, the first dynamo of life. Rain fell from no sky, voices spoke without mouth or meaning. A tree of silver wings bloomed, yielded fruit, shed feathers, bloomed again. In the day between the morning and the evening, the gardener and the winnower played a game of possibilities. The flower game. These are the rules of a game. Let it be played upon an infinite, two-dimensional grid of flowers. Rule 1. A living flower with less than two living neighbors is cut off. It dies. Rule 2. A living flower with two or three living neighbors is connected. It lives. Rule 3. A living flower with more than three living neighbors is starved and overcrowded. It dies. Rule 4. A dead flower with exactly three living neighbors is reborn. It springs back to life. The only play permitted in the game is the arrangement of the initial flowers. This game fascinates kings. This game occupies the very emperors of thought. Though it only has 4 rules, and the board is a flat, featureless grid, in it you will find changeless blocks, stoic as iron, and beacons and whirling pulsars, as well as gliders that soar out to infinity, and patterns that lay eggs and spawn other patterns, and living cells that replicate themselves wholly. In it, you may construct a universal computer with the power to simulate, very slowly, any other computer imaginable and thus simulate whole realities, including nested copies of the flower game itself. And the game is undecidable. No one can predict exactly how the game will play out except by playing it. And yet, this game is nothing compared to the game played by the gardener and the winnower. It resembles that game as a seed does a flower. No, as a seed resembles the star that fed the flower and all the life that made it. In their game, the gardener and the winnower discovered shapes of possibility. They foresaw bodies and civilizations, minds and cognitions, qualia and suffering. They learned that the rules that governed which patterns would flourish in the game and which would dwindle. They learned those rules because they were those rules, and in time, the gardener became vexed. Okay. In all honesty, that didn't feel exactly like my best, but as a good first episode, I think that will do. So, um, but please do reach out if you have any resources or any advice I could take. Um, I would appreciate very much. And if you like the video, please like it. And if you disliked it, please dislike it as well.